Hello. This lecture is about research questions when you're doing your research project, and this is one of the most important things to get right, because you will have an interest in a particular topic, but until you know exactly what you're trying to find out, you can't really do a successful piece of research. Ways of identifying some good research questions are discussed in my textbook. All the units with 3 in them are about research questions, with lots of examples from student projects and from published studies, as well as discussion of how we go about this and how we know what makes a good research question. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about it in this short talk. Typically, when students say what they're going to do some research on, they say, I'm interested in such and such, and they talk about the data. So I'm interested in the language of dating ads, or I'm interested in something to do with phonology, or what I want to do is look at love letters, or find out more about the language of red music reviews or something. And that's a fine starting point, and we looked in a previous talk about the question of how to find something to write about, to research types of topic. But you need to go from having an interest in something to identifying what it is that you hope to find out. This involves framing your questions as interrogatives, putting them into questions that start with what, or how much, or does, that kind of thing. You need to be quite specific here, so it's not just a question of saying what is the language of red brick music reviews like, although that would be a good starting point, but in what way? Is it the vocabulary, is it the grammar, is it how it differs from another type of music review text or from another type of student newspaper, other parts of the paper? So you've got to think quite specifically. Don't try and answer really big questions like how do children learn language? That's much too broad, and people have been puzzling over it for thousands of years. You need something tight that you can actually answer. And remember, this particular project that you do in the first semester as a group is a trying out of ideas, and you don't have much time. You do have the resources of the group, but you only have until week 11 to get your presentation ready. So that means doing the research quite quickly and reporting on your findings using the tools that we're asking you to use. So don't try and be too ambitious. Think tight and small and specific. And take the time to get your questions right. Don't think that the important thing is to rush on to getting the data you need, because until you know what your question is, you won't know exactly what sort of data can help you to answer the question. So it is something to take time over, and not to think about as happening very quickly or at the last minute. Take some time to practice crafting questions, even if they're not about the topic you're eventually going to research, because this can help you with the process, and it can help you with future projects to know how questions are crafted by practicing researchers. So one thing to do is to, when you're doing your reading, look at research questions, pay attention to them as you read articles about your topic. What did previous researchers ask, and how did they frame those questions? Sometimes in experienced work by researchers who've been doing this for a long time, they don't frame the questions as questions, but you can infer them. So you can read what the researcher is telling you they found and say, well, what was the question to which this is the answer? Or you can go to the conclusions and say, if this is what the researchers have concluded, what must they have been asking themselves to arrive at those conclusions? So that's one way of thinking about how to see what other people have done when it comes to identifying good research questions. And then practice drafting some questions yourself. Do it individually, but also in pairs or in the whole group, because you can critique each other's questions. Think about how you could actually answer this question. Think it through. What would it mean to get an answer to this question? You may find that you've come up with an interesting but unanswerable question, and then it's no good for a research project, or at least it certainly needs modifying. and think about what the findings would look like. This isn't a question of saying, I know what the answer is. I know that women talk more than men, or that men use swear words more than women do, and I'm going to devise a project to prove it. It isn't about having the answers already, but it is about thinking, what would the answers look like? Would I need statistics to demonstrate what the answers are? Would I need extracts from concordance lines? Would I need a whole range of data, because I'm saying I'm comparing this with that? Well, what is the that you haven't thought about yet? You might have thought about the this, and then you realise, well, in order to answer a question frame like that, I need another set of data. Otherwise it doesn't really answer the question. Think about questions that you investigated last year. So there might be a topic that you explored in your questionnaire which would form the basis of a new question. There might be words that you investigated when you did your dictionary investigation that could lead to a new question that you could answer this time. Similarly with your corpus study. So look at what you've already done. You may have had a mark for it, it may all be over, but you can still use it. Don't throw things away. There's progression and development through these modules. So look at your previous assignments and then frame the questions that you would like to answer but which you haven't answered yet, because obviously you don't just want to repeat something you did in the first year, and that wouldn't be fair for assessment anyway. You might hear somebody make an offhand comment about language, and then you think, actually, is that true, or where does that idea come from? The other day I heard someone talking about whether it should be someone or somebody in the context of different sorts of discourse. Well, is there a rule about that? If there is, where does it come from? Mostly we tend not to think in terms of what's correct, we tend to think in terms of patterns of usage. But is there a question there that could be investigated? The sort of question you might pose about that topic is, do students at the University of Birmingham believe that there is a difference between these two? If so, what do they think it is? What corpus evidence is there for different patterns of usage? So if you look at someone and somebody in the corpus, do you find certain contexts favouring one and other contexts favouring the other? And there's an article about this online, and there's the reference to it if you want to follow that one up. When you look at what experienced researchers who get research funding do, you can see what sorts of questions they put into their funding bids to try and get money to be allowed to do the research they want to do. And so those are good examples of larger scale, obviously, research than you can do, but it's the type of approach that you can learn from. So if you were interested in how do English speakers change the last consonants of words to link them up to the next word, and we've talked about that in Language Works B, the fact that this happens, well, these researchers wanted to know in a bit more detail exactly in what circumstances, that's phonological circumstances, people drop final T's and D's and don't sound them. And there's the Economic and Social Research Council funded project that was called Word Joins in Real Life Speech, a large corpus-based study. So they used corpus evidence, spoken language, in a corpus format to investigate these research questions. Another example, this one was about, again, using corpus data, but these were live telephone calls to service operators. How do people, not pre-recorded messages and so on, but people talking to other people, use the telephone to get certain things done? So again, here are the questions. One research question: what cues do participants use to change speakers smoothly? Another one: how do participants coordinate their linguistic choices, such as which words to use? So they use this corpus to investigate those questions. It's not something you could do at the scale at which you're working, but the point of it is to show you how carefully the questions are crafted so that you can imagine what the answers would be. You don't know what they'd be, you don't know what the actual answers would be, but you could see what kind of findings a research project like that could come up with. Another one, This is a study by a couple of authors who looked at how, when people were talking in sports reporting contexts about the Olympic Games, there was a difference between how they talked about male athletes and female athletes. And notice the question framing there, to what extent? So you're going to get some sort of a quantitative answer. This amount or that amount would be an answer to a to what extent question. Another one, the background to this is that somebody has noticed that you can use absolutely as an adjunct, that's absolutely right, and as a disjunct, as in absolutely, when somebody asks you a question. So their questions were, how is it possible for this word to be used as both kinds of adverb, and what's the connection between these two uses, if there is one. So again, how is it possible for, is there any connection between two types of question to which you can imagine a certain sort of answer. As I've said, you can scale things down, so you could look at those published studies and other ones that you've read and perhaps do a smaller version on a smaller scale, not perhaps trying to compare huge groups of people or a large corpus with a smaller corpus, but just something on a smaller scale. Or you could take something you've done before and extend the question you researched using the full resources of the group, so that someone else might say, well, I looked at this, you looked at that, I wonder whether we could compare 2 or 3 things of this kind, whether it's the dictionary project, questionnaire, corpus-based project or whatever. Remember, you are working for this semester as a member of a team, so you can pool your suggestions for questions and you can help each other by critiquing other people's questions. Don't be afraid to be critical. There's no need to be nasty and unpleasant, and you can look at the suggestions on the wiki for how to work as a team. But don't just be so nice with other people that you don't really make any progress because you're afraid to say, actually, this isn't a very good idea, or should we rephrase it so that it's clearer? And the question to ask yourself is this question clear? Is it precise? Can it be answered? Is it something we actually can do in the context of a short project? And if we do answer it, what would we imagine ourselves presenting? Would it be graphs? Would it be sampled results? What would we think we would be presenting to the other people on the module when we've finished answering this question? You may find that you start with a question which, when you get down to actually trying to answer it, is too big, and you might decide, well, we started off saying we were going to look at 3 examples of this, or 10 examples, or 2 programs that make use of this sort of language. Actually, we're only going to do 2, we're only going to do 5, we're only going to do 1. Or in some other way you might need to scale it down. We were going to ask 3 groups of respondents of different ages. Now we're just going to use young adults and older adults. And so we would tweak the question accordingly. And it's okay to do that, because you're trying things out, you're learning how to do it. Better to try and narrow things down partway through and do what you're left with very well, than to stick to a bigger question that you started with that you realise you can't actually answer. So that's a little bit to think about in terms of setting yourself questions that are answerable for your research project, and you might want to look at it again when you're doing your individual study. I hope it's been useful.